Good afternoon. For those who are just joining us, my name is Livonia Montute, and I am the Program Manager for the Massachusetts Institute for College and Career Readiness. We are excited today to have this conversation with a broad and diverse range of folks on social emotional learning and career development. Just a few notes for our call today. We will not be providing an online phone number. We hope that you will engage with us through the chat box located in your bottom right corner. And if you have any audio difficulties, please let us know. One of our exciting features is that we are able to broadcast live from one of our districts in New Bedford, so we will be able to hear the sounds of our school environment. We ask for your patience in this, but it is exciting to be embedded in the work of the schools. So just a brief overview on the MICCR. The MICCR is a collaboration between three entities within the Massachusetts context: Boston University, Mass Inc., and the Rennie Center for Education. Our focus is to build the capacity of districts and communities to engage in evidence-based strategies to improve college and career readiness. This work is implemented through these three agencies in close collaboration with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education located here in Massachusetts. Our principal investigators for this program are Scott Solberg, who will be joining us on this call, as well as Chad Jontremont of the Rennie Center and Ben Foreman, as well as the research director, Carrie Conaway with the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. The MICCR is generously supported through grants from the Institute of Education Sciences, and we are in the second year of a 3-year project with our 15 districts. So I will turn it over to Scott Solberg to introduce our first presenter.
Thank you, Livonia. This is very exciting, and just want to also add that for the chat box, in the past we've had some very interesting conversations and a lot of resources being shared. We will be able to record that as well and have a printout of the chat, so please use it as you start asking questions and answering among yourselves in the audience. And then once we get done with the 3 presentations, we'll have plenty of time for more discussion and conversation as well. So it's a great honor to have Roger Weissberg with us today. He is obviously the leader in this area of social emotional learning and brought it to the national landscape. The reason I'm personally so excited is I think he shares a common vision with our MICCR project, which is how do we build capacity within organizations, and a lot of the stuff he's been doing at the state level and even national. How do we build that capacity to engage in providing the kinds of interventions and supports to make social emotional learning a reality for all of our youth? And so I'm not going to take too much time. I think many of you know Roger's work in CASEL and what's happening there. Roger, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, and we look forward to an exciting conversation.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm very excited. So I think maybe exciting and excited are some of the words we'll be using today to have worked on this webinar with the Massachusetts Institute for College and Career Readiness and the Rennie Center. One of the things that's fun as the Chief Knowledge Officer of CASEL, it's a lifelong learning journey, and the chance to make connections of SEL to important outcomes like career readiness and thriving, the chance to see exciting work going on at the state level, especially some of the great things going on in Massachusetts. Just the preparation for this meeting and this conversation we'll have today is something that I am very much looking forward to. I'm sure there'll be mention later about the outstanding work of the Rennie Center in terms of their documents on the condition of education in the Commonwealth and toward a more comprehensive vision of student learning and social and emotional learning opportunities for Massachusetts, lessons for the nation. CASEL's a collaborative, and we learn from partnering with and collaborating with others. So I'm excited. my professional life, I'll just say a sentence or two about that, I really discovered my question 40 years ago in 1976. And the question was, how can schools, families, and communities partner to promote positive outcomes in children? And I will share everything I've learned in 40 years in one slide. And I think just to make a comment also about my presentation and overview, I think the goal is to, at a very high level, share some of the things that CASEL has been doing, some of the current work we're really in the midst of. But to lay a foundation, I won't get into any details really too much on any of these slides, but maybe there can be interesting conversation with the audience and amongst the presenters as we talk about things. So anyhow, the work that I've done over the years in terms of identifying actionable research-based strategies to enhance the positive development of children and adolescents focuses in part on families or caring adults. Every child needs either family support or somebody, an adult who cares about him or her and supports them. And then there's another component of certainly creating a context for positive development, which is to provide a high-quality education and to connect students with their schools. We certainly feel at CASEL that part of a high-quality education is one that emphasizes social, emotional, and academic learning. In addition to the family and the school-based work, it's important to have safe communities that are supportive for children and high-quality out-of-school time programs. CASEL in recent years has begun to really look at the link between how SEL during the school day can link with out-of-school time programs. And then finally, a component, an evidence-based component of promoting positive outcomes in students and young people is to make sure they have opportunities to build their own social and emotional competence in a variety of areas. So we have an organization, CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, that was founded in 1994, and CASEL focuses on advancing the science of social and emotional learning, expanding evidence-based effective practice from preschool through high school, and improving federal and state policies. And again, and I think you'll see this from the presentation today, we're a collaborator, and we try and create strategies to advance the field, and we bring people together, and we've worked over the last 22 years to create a broader community of collaboration. The field has evolved tremendously. The first book that we wrote, and there were 9 co-authors in 1997, was a field defining. We defined the field of social and emotional learning and operationalized it in this book, Promoting Social and Emotional Learning Guidelines for Educators, that was published by the ASCD and sent out to 100,000 educators. And so we got off to a bang with our earliest work, and most recently in 2015, 95 contributors to a 37-chapter handbook on social and emotional learning research and practice has come out. So the growth of the field, just by thinking about a beginning with 9 collaborative writers in a book, and now having 95 contributors to a large handbook, I think is just one of many perspectives that this is capturing the attention of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers, and people who care about children and youth. Anytime we work with a district, whether it is a school or a state, we always start with the same basic question. What do we want our children to become, to know, and to be able to do when they graduate? And very often people respond not with academic outcomes, although those are important, but more things about being a good problem solver, a good decision maker, being a lifelong learner, having integrity and honesty, responsibility, and things like that. And we work with definitions within and wherever it's a starting point in our work, and then we basically ask the question, how can an entire community be organized to ensure that all students reach the stated goals that are important to parents, to teachers, to people in the community. There are a lot of ways that you could make a case for SEL. One of the things that we have found powerful, the Search Institute, when they've looked at assets in a national survey, if you look at a survey that would ask children, how do people who know you well, how would they rate you on thinking ahead about the results of your choices, or caring about others' feelings, or respecting the values and beliefs of people of different races and culture? You know, one of the concerns is fewer than 50% say that others would recognize them to have these competencies. And then, you know, more broadly, there's a question about their perception of what kind of environment the school provides. Only 29% endorsing that their school provides a caring and encouraging environment. You know, it may be that the schools are trying harder to do this, but this, at least in terms of one survey, was a distressingly low percentage in terms of how a sample of more than 100,000 kids responded. Another thing that has motivated our work over time is there are many well-intentioned efforts in schools to prevent violence or high-risk sexual behavior and AIDS or drug use, and are positive things. It can be to promote citizenship, our careers, our positive health. But many of these efforts are fragmented, and there's not a common language when they get introduced, and things are often one-year programs that are not connected with earlier grades to later grades. So over the years, we've tried to create SEL as a coordinating framework that builds on student strengths, that is focused on both academic and life success, that involves coordination and systemic efforts. So again, as CASEL has worked with schools and districts around the country, there's an emphasis on school-family community partnerships, and we make linkages to character and service and citizenship and career education and health promotion and integration with academic performance. If you look at one simplified model of this work, you know, the view is that if you have schools, families, and communities working together to promote the social, emotional, and academic learning of kids, it can lead to academic success, better health, better social relationships, better citizenship, better career engagement, fulfillment, and success. We have tried to create frameworks that are unifying frameworks to think about this work. So we've talked about 5 competencies over the years: self-awareness and self-management, which are intrapersonal competencies; social awareness and relationship skills, which are interpersonal competencies; and then responsible decision-making can either be about your own behavior or interactions with others. And the view has been, if you know yourself and can manage yourself, and you are compassionate, have empathy, and take perspectives of others, and have good relationship skills, and you make good decisions, we feel that you're going to be ready to navigate life successfully. And what we're really looking for overall is a balance of the intrapersonal with the interpersonal and social. In addition to thinking about how to focus on and enhance these competencies in application in day-to-day life, when we work with a school, there's a focus on what goes on in the classroom in terms of curriculum and instruction, what school-wide practices and policies can be coordinated with these things, and what are the family and community partnerships that can be created. So again, we're thinking systemic, we're thinking aligned, coordinated efforts to promote these competencies. And I think we started out in the field 20 years ago with a couple of core questions. Are people with better social and emotional skills more likely to succeed in school and life? Well, now there's like thousands of correlational and longitudinal studies that say absolutely throughout the lifespan. I'm going to share some data, in terms of the question, can these skills be taught? And, including our meta-analysis where we looked at 213 experimental control group studies in this area that produced positive outcomes. There's a question, will children be better prepared for college, career, and life if we teach social and emotional and academic skills? Again, the answer is yes. We have followed up our meta-analysis that was published in Child Development in 2011. We've just submitted a longitudinal meta-analysis of social and emotional learning with long-term positive impacts. And so then the question is, well, how do we ensure that educators and service providers and families teach these competencies successfully? I mentioned the first question about SEL as a predictor of success in school and life. There's been an interesting study that just came out. Damon Jones and Mark Greenberg and Max Crowley published it in the American Journal of Public Health, where they looked at long-term outcomes on kindergartners' SEL skills rated by teachers, controlling for a bunch of other variables, and really find long-term connections to success in school and in employment and fewer involvements with the police and so on and so forth. It's an interesting and important study. The meta-analysis, again, that we did, this is with 213 studies looking at programs that were focused on enhancing social and emotional development. We looked across 6 areas. Were kids' skills improved? Were their attitudes about themselves, others, and school improved? And then what were the behavioral impacts on pro-social interactions during the day and academic achievement, conduct problems, and emotional distress? And probably the major finding here that has excited the world of schools is the fact that social and emotional development in the 37 studies that looked at impact on academic achievement saw an 11 percentile point gain in the program kids compared with those who had not achieved and not been exposed to social and emotional learning. So this is, the equivalent of raising test scores from the 50th to 61st percentile with a focus on social and emotional development. One of the CASEL doesn't have a program in terms of our work. We decided a long time ago that, especially in the United States, where there's a lot of local decision making, that we wanted to set standards for the field and give choice to people. So we have created a series of guides, and they're on our webpage if people would like to download them. But we most recently in 2013 reviewed preschool and elementary school programs, and then in 2015 looked at middle and high school programs, and we create consumer report guides. What's the evidence base for the program? How well designed is the curriculum in terms of enhancing these competencies? What kind of support is there for quality implementation? And we review programs and pick CASEL Select programs which we think meet certain criteria for being well-designed, well-evaluated, and supportive of quality implementation. Programs, we're strongly supportive of programs, and that's a place where a lot of schools and districts start. But we have increasingly focused on systemic work, working with school teams to have a vision of what they want to achieve in terms of promoting the social and emotional and academic learning of students. We always focus, before introducing any new programming, we look at the strengths and the history of what's gone on already. What are the resources that are underway to promote kids' social and emotional learning. We don't focus, assuming that we're coming into a tabula rasa here. We're assuming actually that there's probably many things that are going on that are good, and sometimes the big issue is how to integrate and coordinate across these many well-intentioned prevention and promotion programs. And we focus a lot on what type of professional learning can help, implementing evidence-based practices, but also focusing on school-wide programming, as well as working with families and communities, and how to use data as a part of a continuous improvement process. So we've created a school guide for teams to think about systemic SEL. Yeah, increasingly now, we've done surveys, national surveys. Well, what do teachers think of this work? We worked with the Civic Enterprises and Peter D. Hart Research Associates to do a national survey. And the results from their survey is that an overwhelming majority of teachers at this point say, we think SEL is good for all kinds of kids, and it will prepare students for the workforce and make them good citizens, and help them stay on track to graduate, and prepare them to get through college. So and they think that they should do it, teachers. But at the same time, they say to do that, we need support. We need the support of the principal, the Board of Education, and superintendent, state departments of education, because if we're going to do this, we have to have good support and professional learning to do it well. We've also worked with people looking at the economic value of social and emotional learning. There's been a study done by people at Columbia University, Clive Belfield and Hank Levin and others, that looked longitudinally at 6 SEL interventions and found that for every dollar invested in these programs, there's an $11 return on investment. So the implications of all of this for us have been that we think that SEL works across multiple outcomes and grades. It's doable. Programs can very often be run by existing school staff and out-of-school staff collaborating. There's teachers think this is important. There's a return on investment, but again, SEL needs support. Implementation, in our meta-analyses, we found that if programs weren't implemented well, they didn't have the impact that we hope to have seen. So we've also worked a lot on federal and state policy in this work. Probably our biggest effort in recent years has been to have a collaborating districts initiative. We're now working with 10 districts across the country on system-wide SEL implementation. And this is a fairly complicated model here, but the work with districts at the central office level involve how do you cultivate commitment and support for SEL, how do you assess the resources and needs of districts and schools, how do you establish, again, classroom, school-wide, and community programming, and then how do you establish systems for continuous improvement. So we work with districts. We actually have a more complex theory of action, which highlights how they can promote change in schools throughout the district, and again, thinking of systemic school-wide work to produce positive short-term and long-term behavioral benefits for students. When we partner with a district, we do strategic planning on SEL implementation and technical assistance, provide technical assistance to think about sustainable quality programming for the district. We support their efforts to evaluate implementation at the district and school level. We have a variety of school guide and a district guide that can help guide this work. And also, I think one of the important things we've learned over the 5 years that we've done the CDI, Collaborating Districts Initiative, is while districts appreciated some expertise externally from the start, the real experts that they like are these collaborative communities that we create among the districts. So there are role-alikes in the district. So the superintendents talk with each other, and the research and evaluation departments talk with each other, and there are district leads in social and emotional learning who talk with each other, sharing ideas about what they're doing, what's working, and where the challenges are, and how to do things better. The American Institutes for Research has been evaluating the CDI, with two basic questions. Can districts do this, and do kids benefit from the programming that's taking place? There's a fair amount of really strong data at this point saying that districts who implement SEL systemically over time improve in their quality of implementation, both at the district level and the school level. And then in terms of outcome data, we've seen positive gains in academic achievement, in social and emotional competence at the elementary school level, primarily at this point, in terms of kids' perceptions of school climate, and also districts are reporting on improvements in attendance and discipline overall. Now, we've talked about the class level, the school level, the parent and community level, the district level. To make all this work, CASEL now has introduced a collaborating states initiative, and we're about to come out with an RFP. This is a project supported by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to identify 5 collaborating states to work on SEL policies, guidelines, and standards. This is clearly serving up now because Massachusetts is doing such great work in this area, and Jennifer will be talking about that. But we've reviewed standards from all 50 states, and we are focused on how they're developed and how they can go about developing and adopting standards and quality implementation. We began this work actually more than 10 years ago with the state of Illinois, which was the first state in the country to have student learning standards from preschool to high school in social and emotional learning. So they have math standards, social studies, English language arts, science, and so forth, but they also have SEL standards now. There's been increased interest in this work over time. Actually, all 50 states now have preschool social and emotional development standards. There are some trailblazing states who have focused on pre-K to 3 standards, and others, Kansas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Illinois, who have preschool to high school standards. And then Massachusetts, they're on a journey which you'll hear about soon, doing really interesting high-quality work. When we think about standards, CASEL has worked on models for freestanding standards, how to integrate standards with other academic subject areas, how to provide guidance on how adults can support student development through teaching practices, guidance about how to create positive learning environments, culturally and linguistically sensitive and relevant approaches to doing this work, as well as providing tools for high-quality implementation of the work. So we really think about standards as part of a holistic package that identifies, to go back to the beginning, what a community wants, what kids should know and be able to do from preschool through high school, what evidence-based curricula and instruction can be put into place, what kind of professional development can take place that are aligned with the standards and the instruction, and then how do you do assessment that allows teachers to monitor and foster progress. So in conclusion, one thing I would say, the title of this presentation was Towards Nationwide Social and Emotional Learning. CASEL now is a strategic plan, and part of the things that we're doing, our 6 core areas, have involved working to co-convene kindred spirits who want to advance research, practice, and policy, and in collaboration with the Aspen Institute, we're about to launch a national commission on social, emotional, and academic development. We have a work group now with 20 researchers and practitioners to advance social and emotional competence assessment. Some people may have seen some of the debates in New York Times and other articles about how to do this well going forward. We document the outcomes and have models and resources to work with districts across the country, and we want to leverage that evidence and those models to expand work in other districts from our learnings. Again, I mentioned our collaborating state initiative. Probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll be sending out an RFP to all 50 states to possibly be involved in that effort. And then we've done certainly work over the years with the Department of Education and Congress providing testimony about quality evidence-based work. So I'll conclude with a comment that Franklin Delano Roosevelt made over 70 years ago. We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build the youth for our future. And I really think that in times of challenges, economic challenges, certainly relevant for our discussion today, but with other concerns about terrorism and the like, one of the things is we want kids who are academically successful, but we also want them to have the social and emotional competencies so that they can navigate their worlds more effectively and contributing to more positive global society.
All right, Roger, thank you so much for the intro part of the conversation. I'm going to take control of the slides, I believe, and go to the next one. The purpose of having this conversation was to begin looking at how social emotional learning connects to this whole idea of college and career readiness, and specifically around career readiness. And I'm going to try to present some ideas, and I'm hoping, Roger, you're going to have a chance to kind of reflect on that and see, what your opinion is about the general idea. The big issue that we have around college and career readiness in national, I'm just going to show you the SEL competencies in terms of things. I like this because it was from the Rennie Center. They did a nice job in their report, and their brief is actually posted under your files section, and you can download it. But it was a nice section just reminding of the 5 areas. But what we're really focused on in MICCR is the college and career readiness as the key, and for that we're talking not just about getting through the high school, but also being able to not only enter that post-secondary, but to have a purpose, to enter college, whether it's a 2-year program, a certification, an industry certificate, or a 4-year degree. The individual's entering that setting with a purpose, with a reason for going and a reason for completing. And what we want to see are completion rates going up. And I'll show you some data in a minute on Massachusetts that we've got a lot of work to do, I believe, in terms of these things. But the key here is college and career readiness, when it originally came out with Achieve.org and ACT kind of leading the way years ago, they really focused it as an issue of test scores. And are the individual entering college with the math skills, the science skills, and the reading skills necessary to really do the college level work? And we certainly agree that that's a critical issue. I don't think anyone disagrees with the kind of the cognitive set of competencies. But what has come on originally, from that is also an idea that there's this whole career readiness component too, which is that purpose. It's that goal setting. It's the who am I and how do I relate to this experience, whether it be college or the world of work. This is just a kind of a template idea of thinking about college readiness then of having 2 components, as you see. One is certainly the cognitive skills, but when we start talking about concepts like self-efficacy, which I'm going to be arguing as part of this social and emotional learning area, what we're really focusing on there is the individual's belief in their ability to do the skills. And we have lots of settings are individuals that may have great math skills but really aren't believing in their ability to do math, and that has the negative repercussions in terms of their career goals. And then career readiness is certainly that idea of entering college with a purpose. And in this work, we've been studying this now for many years with my colleagues from the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth. They're a national TA center focusing on transition, and career readiness is a major part of the efforts that we've been looking at. And we've really kind of divided, or this idea of career readiness as being about 3 areas. I mean, the self-awareness skills, can they identify their skills, interests, and values? Career exploration skills, the idea of being able to look at their goals, the pathways to achieve those goals. And where we put social emotional learning is in this 3rd area, which we call career planning and management, which is what are the skills you need to be employable? What is the financial literacy would fit in there? Certainly job search skills and all this. But a big function of employability is, can you get along well with others? Can you manage yourself effectively? Can you make good decisions? And we feel that a lot of this is very sets up really nicely with social emotional learning. But there is another dimension that I want to bring out too, which I'm calling kind of just the SEL readiness. It goes a little bit beyond the career readiness. And that is this idea of not just having career decision-making skills, but also managing one's stress and health. And I think that's something that we realize that for a lot of our youth, it becomes a very primary issue. And for many youth, is kind of the defining piece that determines whether they continue in school or not, is really just the psychological and emotional distress that they go through. So this is kind of the idea that, in terms of aligning the 5 areas that CASEL has, and kind of assessment strategies that are getting down to skill sets that we can call it resiliency, certainly social emotional learning, the Search Institute. There's a lot of different groups that are talking about different ways of collectively talking about these, but we know they're connected to academic and life success. And so for self-awareness, it's not just the self skills, but also do they value the education? Do they value a post-secondary type of degree? The career readiness, as we talked about, do they understand their skills? Can they identify their interests and their values? And then motivation is really, do they see the relevance? This is from the DC and Ryan work on self-determination. Do they see the relevance of what they're doing and how it relates to their future goals? And that becomes an important piece. Under self-management, we were putting the stress management and well-being, which is kind of the health management piece, as being an added, kind of set of dimensions around self-management. Self-efficacy as well, in terms of one feeling confident in their ability to manage the academic or whatever life challenges they may have. And then actually also just self-management around goal setting. And there's some good research talking about that people who select a few goals and always are maintaining those goals, and then looking for ways to optimize the chances of reaching those goals. So learning the skills and kind of taking that sense of self-regulation and self-advocacy. They live longer and they're healthier is kind of what the longitudinal research shows. So again, breaking it into some concrete areas. The social awareness, adding in there also this idea of social capital from the sense of connection. I think the relationship skills are connected to that as well, along with self-efficacy. There's a lot around social self-efficacy. Does one feel confident in their ability to ask questions, to get help, to seek out support? And then, of course, the stress management as well. There's a lot of things that go into relationship dynamics that are about that it get experienced as challenge. And then the decision-making, I think we've got a lot of different areas we could talk about as well. The career search, self-efficacy is one that the work I've been working on, seeing if you're competent in those areas of self-exploration, career planning and management. This idea of career readiness, so am I able to kind of make a decision about where I want to go? Do I see some purpose in my post-secondary degree? Do I have a sense of where it's leading me in the world of work? And then certainly, again, the goal setting. So this is kind of like the pieces, and we've done a lot of research to showcase this. A lot of this has been very predictive of whether students become at risk in high school. We've studied it from middle school on up. We're studying it now in the sense of preparing for college, and we'll be looking to see how well these can predict college success as well. But what I want to do is I want to showcase a data set that we did with the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth. This was a national study. We had 14 high schools from 4 states that we were actually studying career development as states were engaged and continue to be engaged in individualized learning plans. That was the context of what we were trying to understand, the nature and promise of those plans. And in doing so, we started really looking at some of this social emotional pieces. And so we had a pretty nice data set. And in it, we coded people to say, based on their responses to, do you have some career goals? What are you doing now to prepare for those career goals? What's the relevance of the academics? All kinds of different questions, and it was based on a career decision-making piece, but it was all open-ended, and then we coded them. And we found out that there was only about 40% of the students, only 4 in 10, could actually give you a career goal. They could give you a post-secondary goal, kind of a purpose of why they wanted to go to college, and they could give you an understanding that they had done some self-exploration. They'd engaged in work-based learning. They had looked at themselves and could tell you how their interests and their skills lined up. And so those are the ones that we called career ready. And then after that, then we looked at their social emotional learning, and we found that, in fact, those students that were reporting that were saying they just weren't ready, or we coded them as not ready, had lower academic self-efficacy, Their career decision-making readiness, they just weren't ready to engage in the process. They had more emotional, psychological distress, as well as academic stress, and just less motivation to attend school. They just didn't find school as relevant. And so for us, it's kind of like it helped us kind of at least feel like we were demonstrating a link between career readiness and social emotional learning, and one that we feel is important in the whole landscape of the conversation. That what we found in our work with the ILPs was that career readiness was really driving college readiness, that the students who had a purpose were all of a sudden engaged in school differently. They were taking higher level courses, they were performing better. All the reports were that they were moving the needle towards a post-secondary pathway. And so for us to see the linkage that social emotional learning could be part of that mechanism that we think is helping to drive that, or a core piece, is certainly something that we're feeling, that we're just feeling connects. And there's a couple of reports here that you can find. If you go on our PowerPoint, you can certainly find it. But we also have it on our MICCR website. We have these listed under ILP references as well. So I'm gonna pause there and let Jennifer go on. But I'm hoping that the conversation we'll have, Roger, is going to kind of just see your opinion on what we just talked about. Do you see a connection in there around this whole concept of career readiness, and how SEL might be maybe a key mechanism then, pretty interactive piece as Jennifer takes over. So Jennifer, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thanks, Scott, for that wonderful introduction, and Roger, too, you all have set a wonderful stage for the information that I'll present as part of today's program on some of the Rennie Center collaborations to drill into socio-emotional learning and its priority in Massachusetts. I should mention that in joining Livonia for this webinar, we are, I don't know, broadcasting is the right word, we're sort of streaming live to you from New Bedford High School in New Bedford, Mass. So a shout out to our colleagues here in New Bedford, and also a note about the ambient noise, because high school is just about to get out here on this Wednesday afternoon, so you might just hear the sound of our colleague students in the background. So thanks so much for joining us today. And what I'm going to talk about today is some of the more recent work that the Rennie Center has done on socio-emotional learning. Our interest in this topic has really come from a grassroots and local level. Over the years, the Rennie Center has developed an extensive amount of expertise among issues of dropout prevention, recovery, re-engagement, and also college and career readiness. And across several research studies, we've really heard from many kinds of practitioners that while academics are always a critical focus of their work, the time and attention that they wish they could dedicate to social emotional needs is constantly a concern. And this certainly does extend on much of the context about where the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has been in its education policy reform agenda. Last year was the 20th anniversary of the Massachusetts Education Reform Act, or MIRA, of 1993, that put into place the MCAS achievement, accountability structures, more choices for charter schools, and differentiated funding for districts. And certainly the policy context that we have seen over the last 20 years follows on. We've seen many diverse perspectives in the media among our colleague practitioners develop in those 20 years, where we've had a focus on standards-based reform. We know that critical issues and critical achievement and proficiency gaps remain among student subgroups. We know that there's limited local resources to take on these many challenges that still exist, and that including those that are out-of-school factors that impact academic performance critically. Regardless of whether we're talking about practice at a local level or policy coming from Beacon Hill, we know that there is sort of a meta challenge out there, which is much of the work over the last 20 years, whether it be on the national stage or here in Massachusetts, has really focused on potentially what you could call piecemeal approaches to improve educational outcomes through the pipeline and for our students. And perhaps there's a need for a greater or more comprehensive strategy that not only looks at academic outcomes as they've been measured, again, by state summative assessments that date now 20 years, or a greater and more comprehensive sense of student well-being, certainly as defined by many of the notions that we've heard from Roger and Scott on today. So where this both practice level knowledge and policy level knowledge came together for the Rennie Center, it was really a source of motivation, and we were really motivated to conduct a research study to better understand how socio-emotional learning practice, policy, and measurement are being effectively implemented in other states besides our own here in Massachusetts, as well as districts nationally, and then apply this knowledge to Massachusetts context. Our team really wanted to drill into the linkages of what levers influence and move practice, especially on a nuanced issue like socio-emotional learning, and then what can be taken from these examples and applied to Massachusetts context. So as we move through the discussion today and the slides that I've prepared, I'll largely be presenting key findings from our report entitled Socio and Emotional Learning, Opportunities for Massachusetts, Lessons for the Nation. It's a collaboration between the Rennie Center and ASCD, and was a report that was released in late November, as well as calling on some of the information that we gained from doing local research and presented in our annual Condition of Education report. This year's edition was released in late January and entitled Toward a More Comprehensive View of Student Learning. And I know that both of these files are available to you in our sidebar. So please feel free to access them as you're able. So here we are back again. So what are some of the key lessons that we learned from other states? Our study approach focused in on a few key elements: a literature review, where we looked at empirical studies of the value of an explicit focus on SEL in public education systems, reviewing many of the studies that Roger and Scott have already mentioned today, so I'll move quickly through those. We also engaged in a policy scan, looking at not only states that had defined socio-emotional learning standards, whether those be freestanding standards or integrated into other academic standards, but also looking at the prevalence of SEL policies, regulations, protocols in states across the U.S. We really tried to identify and locate the position that socio-emotional learning has in a state education policy agenda, whether this be from important partnerships among districts, leading districts in the state with CASEL, or other kinds of district or state level initiatives that situated SEL at a crossroads or as a priority. We also then went on to conduct extensive interviews, both with members of state agencies and states or districts that had emerged from the policy scan as SEL leader states, and we'll talk about those sort of extensively in just a minute. And we also then conducted extensive interviews within Massachusetts. Here in the Commonwealth, we really focused on the conditions that might create unique context or identify factors and opportunities that align with other states. So here we spoke with state leaders from our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and Early Education and Care, as well as nonprofit organizations, community partners focused on socio-emotional learning, and leading districts as well. From these data, and there was a lot of it, our team was focused on highlighting considerations for the Commonwealth that can have an impact on socio-emotional learning practice in districts, and also consider whether or not there are possible approaches to measuring some of the key skills that lay at the heart of what socio-emotional learning is about. Before we get into any of our findings, just a keynote here, that is our work really focused on socio-emotional learning as defined by the 5 CASEL competencies. Those behavioral and cognitive skills, Roger already mentioned them. Scott, you presented us with a slide just a couple of minutes ago that really focus on skills that we believe can be taught in a public education setting. We were less focused on wraparound supports. We were really most interested in those aspects of socio-emotional learning that touch teaching and learning function in classrooms, schools, and districts across the Commonwealth. So with that said, let's jump in to talk a little bit about the findings. So the our national scan and our state interviews yielded 4 main findings on how to integrate a focus on socio-emotional learning, or certainly how that focus has been integrated by some of our SEL leader states, as we'll come to call them. I'll review each of these now, but then provide more in-depth information on each in turn across the next couple of slides. So first, when thinking about how to integrate SEL, certainly where there has been a focus on socio-emotional learning, it has come from states and districts grappling with tough questions, like what is socio-emotional learning? What are the skills and competencies we as a set of educators feel are most important, and who is going to own it? While it needs its own home, it also needs to remain aligned with other initiatives. Roger and Scott already spoke to this point quite eloquently today. Next, state-level standards, while they're increasingly important in state education policy context, they also can be deemed insufficient while they're useful tools and put a priority on SEL, they don't guarantee the implementation of practice, and I'll explore this tension in just a minute. Finally, state-level supports can foster local innovation. Work can be done across districts. They can centralize resources and secure and allocate funding. And finally, while assessment is important, and certainly the topic of the day, our evidence point for that being that I think the New York Times article that we all read within the last month, linked to accountability must also consider key practical considerations like data availability and what the expectations for learning are. So as we sort of move across these next couple of slides, I'd encourage you to keep your eye on that green bubble, as it'll provide specific state examples from some of our leader states as we talk through these issues. So this first notion, what is SEL and who owns it? We know from hearing from respondents across states and districts that in 44 states, SEL or socio-emotional learning is not prioritized independently. Districts and states don't necessarily have a separate department or unit focused on socio-emotional learning, but rather many have chosen to integrate it into other standards and have done sequencing, extensive sequencing or crosswalking work. On the one hand, this is a strength. So SEL's adaptability and easy compatibility with other areas of education is an asset. But respondents also report that it's hard to know where to house the work in an Office of Education or even perhaps in a Student Support Services unit. And it depends quite critically on a common understanding of what SEL means, what student expectations are, and how local context is implicated. In Rhode Island, the state agency has opted for a cross-functional team that focuses on socio-emotional learning, and leaders describe a culture of quiet persistence from several offices that have worked to crosswalk academic standards and socio-emotional learning standards. Moving to our next topic, state-level standards are important but insufficient. And here we heard a lot of consensus on this issue. First, states that were part of this research study, many of them have pursued or advocated for freestanding SEL standards. Kansas is a great example. Their socio-emotional and character development standards led the nation in being one of the first sets of freestanding SEL standards. However, without additional supports and mechanisms for implementation, simply adopting standards is insufficient to guarantee changes in practice. I'd also highlight the work that has been done by the Connecticut Department of Education. They've integrated socio-emotional learning into academic learning standards much in the same way that Rhode Island has done, and have begun the process of drafting a crosswalk between socio-emotional learning and Common Core standards. Other states have attempted to create alignment between the SEL and health standards, school counseling, and the like to ensure its integration in several different functional areas. I think that's actually quite an interesting example. State-level supports can foster local innovation. Across states, we've seen that districts are key leaders, and where SEL implementation has been at its strongest, it has been prioritized not only as a state-level focus, but a local one as well. State agencies in these states and districts examples provided critical supports and several supports, not only drawing on their ability to network educators across districts for knowledge share and practice share information. They've provided central resources like access to databases and other such kinds of supports that districts themselves wouldn't be able to supply. And they've helped districts, as well as themselves, secure and allocate funding. While states have been quite forward-looking in being able to define a common language about what SEL competencies students need to master, less is known about how to train teachers to develop these skills in students. And what we heard from many respondents across the study is that many educators would benefit from additional support for socio-emotional learning for what they already do in classrooms without assistance and how they can become better and more skilled at addressing students' socio-emotional learning needs. Pennsylvania has embraced this challenge. It's focused largely on governance issues, helping districts, states, and even schools themselves understand the kinds of steps forward that they can take in terms of socio-emotional learning. They've rallied stakeholder support. New Hampshire, another great example here, has taken an active stance in funding. The state gave every one of its districts a grant to start teacher study groups and provide peer-to-peer training on socio-emotional learning issues. And finally, Rhode Island developed a database for collecting and displaying SEL-related indicators and online resources, including web tools, profiles of schools, and how they're handling socio-emotional learning. So lots of different kinds of supports that states are providing, but the notion here is that they are certainly bolstering the work being done in districts. And finally, the issue of assessment and accountability. Many respondents agree that some level of accountability and evaluation is important to move an SEL initiative forward. However, respondents across our sample, whether this be at the district level or state level in Massachusetts or nationally, responded that more knowledge is really needed to successfully implement statewide assessments. I think we will probably have a robust discussion about this, so I'm going to move quickly through the rest of my comments. But currently, the most commonly used measures of socio-emotional skills are often based upon student self-report and teacher self-report on students, and are not necessarily standardized. Lots of districts are using what we would call proxy data, whether that be absenteeism, suspension, and other disciplinary actions, truancy and dropout rates, and other non-academic indicators, really as a stand-in for the socio-emotional well-being of their students. Obviously, lots of innovation in this area is possible, and where districts have made investments, they are often working with partners who are bringing assessments to them and not developing their own, which, again, I think is an interesting topic we can certainly dive into further. So with these findings, what did we learn, and what would our team necessarily recommend for an academic leader state like Massachusetts that has taken legislative action around issues linked to socio-emotional learning, whether that be bullying, safe and supportive school climate? They've, as Roger and Scott have both introduced, they've put together protocols, templates, standards for both student supports and as pre-K and K universal SEL learning standards. There's been a lot of work in the community development front. Well, I'll talk about this extensively over our next examples, but where socio-emotional learning has perhaps been its most successful and most innovative, community partners are engaging with school districts. And finally, the state has also taken steps forward to have professional learning standards and professional development offerings codified and aligned with socio-emotional learning. I do want to mention that we'll be transitioning here in just a moment to look at a number of district-level Massachusetts examples. These are all noteworthy in the sense that it is where districts have had a leadership role in innovating around socio-emotional learning. And where leaders have placed a priority on socio-emotional learning as a bolster to supporting students in terms of both their academic performance, overall health and well-being, and as part of a pathway for students to a college and career readiness or college and career success model. Interestingly, and we'll talk about this a lot over the next couple of minutes, districts across the state are integrating SEL at different points in the K-12 pipeline and have really taken very varied approaches. So I think you'll find the next example is quite interesting. However, I'm going to take a break for just a second because our chat box has really started to come alive. So we have a couple of interesting questions. One about New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and others are starting with seed funding. How much money or funding are we talking about for a district? Great question. In the case of New Hampshire, they were really quite small grants. Districts were asked to apply for, I believe the process was districts were asked to apply for how much funding they needed to be able, to start a local, and when I say local, a school level, study group or peer-to-peer training model. So the funding was on a one-year basis, it's my understanding, and it's also my understanding that it was largely based on what SEL goals you have. I don't want to give a specific dollar amount because I actually don't have my notes in front of me, but from my understanding, the notion that it was a seed grant was really meant to just buy out teacher time at a very basic level and provide very basic supports for any instructional supports and materials that they needed because teachers were responsible for a lot of the development work. Okay, so with that, thanks for the great question, and please keep them coming. I'm going to jump into some of the things that we've learned about Massachusetts in conducting this national research. So from these lessons learned from other states, the Rennie team developed a district-level blueprint, and you'll find this in our socio-emotional learning state policy report. This really focused on the actions that district leaders can take to prioritize and integrate a focus on socio-emotional learning. As we said in some of the comments, that for districts and states to move forward, much of the leadership is really capitalized at the local level. As we saw, there was sort of 4 steps that district leaders and their colleagues took. First, and this may be a universal place to start for our conversation today, district leadership really needs to prioritize SEL. SEL implementations can only flourish where they're prioritized among multiple sets of stakeholders, whether this be school level leadership, teachers themselves, and even extending that to community partners. District leaders must fully embrace socio-emotional learning and recognize that it's central to the academic function of the school, as well as students and staff well-being. Commitment's got to be shared by decision makers, educators, local community members, parents, all who have a role and a responsibility for actively shaping the SEL climate and culture. Where this has been done most effectively, and I should note that there's much overlap between our MICCR districts and the examples that I'll provide. So we looked at 3 Massachusetts districts, Gardner, Reading, and Fall River. SEL is a leadership focus. In all 3 of these districts, superintendent and district leadership teams have initiated or prioritized this work You'll hear a lot more about these 3 districts as I move forward in my examples, but district leadership wrote socio-emotional learning into strategic plans, made it a focus for professional development for educators at all levels, and is really also communicating consistently with school leadership about this priority. Moving forward, the next piece that we found that was quite universal across all of our districts and is a central tenet of how to move socio-emotional learning work forward. Even in districts with strong leaders and fully engaged communities, shifting the district vision to incorporate socio-emotional learning requires considerable resources. I spent a little time talking about the different kinds of varieties of resources, but to say it again, adequate funding, whether that be from district operating funds, seed grant funding from New Hampshire is a great example, dedicated state funding. There's an allocation of human capital in districts who are doing this work quite well as a need to build professional capacity, whether that be from districts as a team themselves or also accessing external resources. Some key questions for district leaders to consider: what funding sources already exist in your district? Who in your district could serve as an SEL leader, coach, or trainer? And what kinds of resources exist that can be used to enhance SEL competencies? Certainly in the notion that ingredients matter in terms of building a SEL, building and sustaining an SEL focus. I'd like to point to Gardner, Massachusetts. They designed a teacher leader curriculum for socio-emotional learning, and then they went on to designate 2 teacher leaders per school that not only received training from the district, including some external consultants, but they also then had the responsibility to provide professional development to colleagues in their school. So not only creating and expanding the SEL expertise in their district, but then making sure that that expertise got translated into local focus on SEL and also local classroom implementation. And this continues as what I mean to say here, this is not a one-shot deal. These teacher leaders continue to get trained on an annual basis in response to not only district priorities, but local context and changing needs as well. Next up, integrating SEL really needs a broad-based solution. Many respondents discussed the need to calm their colleagues' fear about adding yet another competing initiative to their workload. We've all heard so much about this and experienced it in our daily work with and in schools. They've emphasized the importance of integrating SEL into a broad mission of the school district. We've talked about this quite extensively this afternoon, so that SEL becomes an integral part of the approach to education rather than any kind of add-on. So thinking about the initiatives that are already in place that attend to SEL-related needs, how they really sort of dovetail with some of the biggest learning needs, and how SEL can enhance, integrate, and align with academic curriculum. I would call your attention to Rennie, Massachusetts. Here, socio-emotional learning has really been a focus of a community-wide initiative embedded in a community coalition focused on substance abuse issues. It includes the school district and has really come to view socio-emotional learning as a important prevention technique for the ability for the community to manage a drug-free youth population. So interesting in the sense of how much of the community has become invested and how much socio-emotional learning has become a forefront of that community's approach. Next up, the always controversial and always deep and rich conversations about measure and evaluate and how to support an SEL focus with data. Many respondents talked about the challenges that lay ahead here, but the strong desire for some form of accountability for socio-emotional learning implementation in their districts and schools. And the fact that evaluation was very much a work in progress for them in their home district. Many district leaders might consider the concrete steps that team members may be able to take to further SEL and the evidence points that they might use to figure out how their strategies and approaches are working, how districts, families, and students know that they're gaining SEL competencies that are important for college and career success, and districts also are focusing on the data that they already have, that they already collect about student progress, school climate, and teacher climate. All important questions as our focus becomes even more fine-tuned on some of the measurement issues. I leave you with a quote, perhaps not as eloquent as the one that Roger started us off with from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but certainly one that is very timely, very relevant, and very practical from one of our interview respondents, that socio-emotional learning isn't something else on the plate, rather it is the plate, and once you get the plate established, everything else flourishes. I thought it was particularly well placed given the critical importance that we've seen socio-emotional learning across many of the kinds of leaders that we talked to in this study and many of the learning needs that we heard about that are being addressed through socio-emotional learning focus. So,
great.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, that was great. So, Jennifer, before we turn it back over to Roger, just one question that had come up in the list. Now, I know that the Rennie Center really stays agnostic in terms of taking positions on things. You're really trying to give a very, a very balanced perspective of it. But you did make the point that states are struggling in regards to who owns this SEL piece, and I know Steve Schneider asked in the chat box that, and I kind of echoed it too. From your perspective, as you're looking at it, what are kind of the who in the education landscape would be good potential owners of this whole initiative?
Scott, it's a great question, and thank you, Steve and Scott, for raising it. I think, yes, we at the Rennie Center do tend to stay agnostic. I think one of the challenges in the kinds of research activities that we completed as part of this study didn't really point to a consensus answer on this issue. I think we saw states like Kansas that where leaders felt socio-emotional learning and overall child well-being were so important that they devoted much of the resources to a freestanding set of standards, creating essentially a unit at the State Department of Education that was focused on socio-emotional and well-being, and for them it really gets the nomenclature of character development. We were quite impressed with other states' approaches, namely Connecticut and Rhode Island, where a focus on the Common Core and the kinds of rigorous academics that need to follow on with Common Core implementation meant that socio-emotional learning got integrated into those academic standards. In that case, there is, I would argue, there is a person focused on socio-emotional learning in each of the academic departments, or at least sort of as like a captain for the socio-emotional learning team, if I could say it that way, in each of the academic departments, so that they are so that the strong integration that can foster a well-integrated delivery system is ensured. I think where we have seen implementation be less successful is where ownership has not led to integration. So I think it's less about positionality or placement, but about where can the maximum opportunities for integration happen.
Okay. So Roger, on your end, you must have some ideas on that because you've been working at the state level already on these issues, right?
Well, and at a certain point, we're not allowed, we don't want to be agnostic anymore. We at least want to be opinionated and evidence-based. And some of that evidence is based on really solid research. Some of it is going to be based on best practice models that seem to be working or best policy models that seem to be working. So, so there's not a great science of how to approach this, but I think there can be some guiding questions that people need to think through. One is, should this be part of, and for all that I'm about to say, I would say there need to be alternative models, and there need to be both and strategies. So one of the questions is, should this be housed in curriculum and instruction, or should it be housed in student support? Very often, we'd say, well, both. We work with some people who care about connections to academic instruction more. We work with some people who have cared about multi-tier supports, and where does SEL fit into that? Ultimately, though, I think if we want this to be something for all kids and a core part of education, connection with curriculum and instruction is really important. And that's why we have worked on academic standards. Then I think there's a second question, which is, do you want freestanding standards, or do you want integrated standards? I guess we've taken a both-and strategy there. When we worked with Illinois between 2003 and 2005, we had debates about whether we should try to integrate with all the other academic areas, and including careers and including health, or have freestanding standards. And we thought it was important to do some of both, in part because very often with the academic standards, when people get stressed, the first thing that leaves is the social and emotional dimensions of the work. So as we've been interested more in learning progressions and to think about, what happens preschool through high school, a lot of the states that we have worked with, and a lot of the districts actually that we work with, end up highlighting freestanding standards as part of the work. Once they have that in place, I think then, like Jennifer is saying, the integration with Common Core standards or other areas become important to do. But since we want attention and a light shown on this work, we have thought it is important. And when we do analysis of academic standards, there's sometimes still not the focus on a year by year what's happening and how does one year build on the next. So we do a little of both there.
Great. So Roger, a question that came in actually on the private chat, but I want to raise it up. We've got a lot of districts that are going in on social and emotional learning, and their bandwidth is obviously taxed with all the Common Core and all the other things. And so when career development gets brought up, all of a sudden it becomes a question of, well, we're already doing social emotional learning. How can we do career development too? You and I years ago talked about this in relation to Singapore, that they had a similar situation as well, where they'd gone all in on social emotional learning. And in order to get career development on the table, it had to be aligned with social emotional learning. That was when I was starting my first kind of crosswalks across the two. How would you respond to that? I mean, based on what you heard, do you see a strong connection here with career development? Are the kinds of ways we're thinking about social emotional learning aligned effectively? Just kind of what are your thoughts?
The first thing I'd say is there's a definite connection between SEL and career development, and I think you're going to see this more strongly over the years. I think SEL is a means to certain positive ends, and and there's some research about social and emotional competence saying that it's domain specific. So on the one hand, SEL can be a means to better academic performance. It can be a better means to health. It can be a better means to careers. So when people talk about college, career, and life readiness, and if those are the core concerns that, and priorities in a district, one of the things that I've been a little concerned about is I don't want SEL only. I think that the fact that there are connections to improved academic performance is a motivator and a good selling point for districts. I would like to actually see a lot more connection over time to career development. And, the U.S. Department of Education now has employability skills, which has a great focus on the intra and interpersonal. So I think there has to be so it's going to happen more and more. And CASEL actually, in some of the work we're doing, want to emphasize being effective in careers and in citizenship and in life. So I think that we're going to see more of that emphasized. And, of course, because people have innovation fatigue, and, it goes back to the fragmentation question that I raised earlier, and it was one of the motivators for CASEL 20 years ago. Tim Shriver and I wrote an article called No New Wars, which was basically, there's a drug war and a violence war and a bullying war, and on a positive side there could be careers or positive health or citizenship.
Right.
How do you start to look at these areas and think in more integrative ways? So in different districts, there will be different models of doing that, but I think that it is critically important to make the link to career.
So let me just add another caveat to that too. So in a sense, the social emotional learning could be the mechanism that enables or drives career readiness, but I would also suggest it could go the opposite way, that once a student, the work we were finding is that once the student finds a career and life goal, they start looking to say, well, what do I need to get there? And all of a sudden, those social emotional learning skills become more salient and something that needs to be managed or developed because they now see its relevance to helping them achieve those goals. So I think it can go on both ends. I think the and the difference here is that rather than the intervention being kind of a general one that's used as a school-wide intervention or classroom intervention to build it, the interventions can become more personalized when the student and family are starting to drive kind of an understanding of the needs and what needs to be developed. But any thoughts on that, or does that seem consistent?
Yep, completely consistent. And a lot of this stuff is bi-directional, or sometimes you get motivated because you're in a certain context. I think the work of project-based learning, which I think lays the foundation for career and life readiness with things that really engage and excite kids because they see a connection between, in this case, applying some of these skills. And when you do a project, you set goals and you develop plans for implementation, and you have to use communication and listening skills, and you have to evaluate how you're doing over time and overcome obstacles. And I wanted, Scott, if I can, to go back to your chart.
Sure.
The
I can go back
CASEL
there.
Yep. Really interesting chart, and something that I wanted to amplify a little bit because I think it's so relevant for careers, and I'm curious if you have done, how you break this down. The social connections is really important, I think, for career. And if I were to, I've described SEL in a lot of different ways, but one way to think about it is, can you self-advocate? Can you say what your needs are? And are you good at help-seeking and help-giving? And are you good at accepting help? So very often, and I'll talk about, I've been a college professor for 35 years, the students who get in trouble very often are ones who get overwhelmed, who don't understand. They may not be academically prepared. And the thing that saves them is their social and emotional skills. If they
Right.
don't have a class and approach the professor, and if they're confused, get help from the professor or a TA, teaching assistant. These are so important, and so the social connection variable, being able to say what you need, what support you have, and being open to then accepting it. And a lot of this is connected to mentors, you know, and in the workplace, if you're going to be successful, because you're learning new things, and some you know and some you don't know, and if you have a mentor and there's a peer culture of support, you're, even if you have certain academic deficits or you don't know some of the things related to the career demands, you learn them.
Right. So let me just add to that, and I think you're absolutely on target. The way we measured social connections was perceived availability of support, and it was this idea that if they have the skills to build these relational bases with their parents, with their teachers, with their peers, if they can learn how to do that effectively in high school, they're going to transfer those skills into college, and they're going to recreate those same kinds of social systems. So I think we're on the exact same page. I wanted to also point out a really interesting study done by the Center for Promise. They're the research arm of America's Promise Alliance. And what they found in looking at disconnected youth was exactly what you're describing, the power of that mentor, that caring adult, and the critical nature that that has, both in terms of instrumental support, right? How do we get somewhere? But also that emotional support, and that they need this as an anchor. They need at least one person in their life who can serve as that emotional anchor. And the only thing I would add as a caveat to it is that I don't think it's a caring adult is all of it, because I worked in the high school with a lot of caring adults who actually were so empathic towards the students they felt sorry for them. They couldn't even imagine how someone in such difficult settings could ever, go to college. What I want is I want a caring, and I want an adult who really believes in them, right? So it's almost like an advocate type of adult who really believes in this individual's ability to move forward and stuff. And so I totally agree that I think that is the cornerstone. I think that's the driver of the whole process when we think about it. So totally echo on that.
And
Jennifer,
I think we have to build in.
Interject. So I do want to note there have been a lot of resources that are being shared around. I want to encourage everyone to, as they're coming up with different curriculums or any other resources that you all have seen to be effective, to go ahead and post those links in the chat box. We will compile them and share them out with the group. In addition, feel free to continue to add questions beyond the half hour. We will respond to those in an email format. But I do want to make sure that Joanne's question is raised, which is simply, do students' SEL's competencies follow a straight trajectory, or do they vary depending on various situations that a student may face? So if we could just give a few remarks towards that.
Yeah, I was looking at your question, Ruth, or I think it was Ruth, and also you were asking about this idea of does it transfer into new settings. And I think, I really think that it depends on the what you're defining as the social emotional learning skills. And so the ones that I was presenting are what Jennifer had referred to earlier as malleable skills, things that we can develop in a classroom. And they really, for those students, the question is, do they transfer to resiliency? And if they do, then it means that in those stressful situations, they're going to activate those skill sets. And that's kind of the work I've done throughout my whole career, has been focused on that concept of resiliency, because I was working in low income and some settings that had a lot of violence in it. So I was trying to figure out what is it we can do to support them in making successful transitions. But Roger or Jennifer, do you have any comments on that as well?
Well, kids make transitions into preschool and kindergarten and middle school and high school and then post-secondary education, and it's always a challenge. And this is an absolutely critical time when kids are open to some of the social and emotional skills, and they benefit from having them. So I think identifying transition times is really important, and then identifying the context that provides support to students during these times of transition, and the basic question is, about straight trajectories. I think there's one of the complexities here is it's very variable. There's interesting research even, so you could have great social competence making friends, less good social competence dealing with a bully. So there are situational competencies that I think are needed, and also sensitivity and responsiveness to the environment, so that kids aren't always having to be rugged individualists, but there's more of a sense of community to take on challenges.
Great. Jennifer, any comments?
Roger, in his last articulation of you might be quite good at making friends, but not so skilled at other kinds of interpersonal dynamics that require a socio-emotional awareness, like a bully, I think is actually a great example. I would also, just in terms of getting back to the question raised about transition, I think from both a practice and policy perspective, we've seen socio-emotional learning raised by educators and used in schools and districts as a reactive or responsive stance in regard to either a crisis or trying to build a trauma-sensitive culture, where I think we have seen it been most effective, and this is a credit to Roger's work and a lot of the district partnerships that CASEL is building, is where it has been proactive or preventative, and not noting that socio-emotional learning skills are important for all students, regardless of family circumstance or family background, school setting, community level issues. So arming students with the behavioral and cognitive competencies that they need to be successful in life will naturally help them in these times of transition. So I think if there's one change that I would love to be able to sort of see as this field moves forward, I would think that important framing of proactive instead of reactive and preventative for every student would probably be it.
Great. Great. Livonia, how are we doing? Are there some questions that have popped up that we haven't responded to? I know we're just past the 90-minute mark, so we just wanted to get a check-in. So
I agree. We are at the conclusion of our program, but I just wanted to raise Steve's last point. Essentially, we've had an excellent dialogue about teachers and students, but Steve also raised that a connection point and a motivation for students when it comes to SEL and envisioning careers is also when it comes from employers and potential externships. So bringing in that third dimension is also important in this work as well. So I simply want to thank you all for your time and for your presence with us. Again, we will leave the chat box open for a while so that you can continue to leave questions and remarks, and we will get that information back to you. But thank you.
And then, Livonia, when is our next national webinar? Do we have a date set?
Sure. So the MICCR will host its fourth national webinar on April 27th at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. The topic will be project-based learning and college and career readiness, and we'll be exploring two current models, one based here in Massachusetts, but one also situated in Oregon.
Great. Okay, so project-based learning and college and career readiness, that'll be a fun topic as well. So Roger and Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing out the work. Roger, it's great to see the full life you've had in really pushing this forward, and it's exciting to see it really get a national attention now, and we're hearing the words, we're hearing the concepts. It's a very exciting topic in schools, and obviously those of us from the counseling and psychology and are excited that we're going to be addressing this along with the curriculum pieces. Jennifer, thanks for the presentation on the Rennie Center. It's a great piece of work, and I hope everyone has downloaded the work that you've done on it, the policy brief and the different things you have. I think it's just great, and another good example of the Rennie Center's skill set in terms of helping us understand the national landscape on some of these critical issues. So with that, then, I want to thank everyone for coming. Livonia, thanks for hosting, getting this going, and being there for this whole process. And hopefully we'll see